the worst country in the world, right? They have no military, they have no nothing, they have no parliament.
An immigration operation in Minneapolis has officially begun.
At 4:20 a.m., while most American cities were still asleep, federal tactical teams moved at the exact moment across several states, pulling dozens of Somali suspects from apartments, garages, and small offices that had looked harmless only hours earlier. ICE agents, FBI investigators, HSI units, and armed federal teams seized fentanyl powder, fake prescription pills, heroin, multiple firearms, and more than $600,000 in cash in a single, tightly coordinated strike. This was not a random arrest or a routine drug bust, but a deliberate assault on a hidden criminal system that had quietly operated for years inside calm and trusted neighborhoods. What follows does not rush to expose everything at once, but traces the operation step by step, showing how drugs were moved, money was cleaned, and danger remained unseen in plain sight. Subscribe to Military Power to follow this story, because what was uncovered before dawn may signal a much larger battle still unfolding. Minneapolis at dawn carried a calm that felt almost deliberate, with narrow residential streets lined by parked cars and small family houses that showed no hint of danger behind their doors. Porch lights were still on. Snow and frost clung to rooftops, and curtains hung loose in windows where families slept, creating the kind of quiet that convinces people nothing serious could ever happen there. This was the environment federal agents studied carefully, because these peaceful blocks were not random choices, but carefully selected locations tied together by blood, trust, and silence. The neighborhoods were not known for their high crime rates or frequent police sirens, and that normal appearance was precisely what had allowed the network to function for years without drawing attention. What appeared to be safety was part of the protection. Before the first door was approached, federal teams were already in motion across the city, spreading out in coordinated silence and positioning themselves around multiple homes simultaneously. Agents from the FBI and DEA moved with a pace that showed long preparation, taking positions at front entrances, side doors, and alley access points that most neighbors never noticed. Vehicles without markings stopped at precise distances, engines cut low, and agents stepped out wearing tactical gear designed for control rather than spectacle. Each movement was measured because the objective was not to confront a single suspect, but to prevent an entire family-based network from warning itself. In operations like this, seconds matter more than force. As the signal moved through radios, doors were breached almost together, breaking the quiet in short, controlled bursts that echoed down empty streets. Inside the houses, the layout was familiar and domestic, with kitchens still warm from the night before, and children's shoes lined up near the walls. Agents moved through hallways and staircases with steady pressure, calling out commands and securing rooms one by one without panic. Some occupants froze where they stood, shocked by the sudden presence of federal teams, while others attempted to retreat deeper into the houses before being stopped at narrow doorways. The arrests were swift and firm, focused on control rather than confrontation, as the goal was to remove people without giving the network time to react. What made the operation different from a typical drug arrest was the way the targets were connected. These were not isolated dealers or unrelated couriers, but relatives who trusted one another and shared responsibilities across households. One home handled storage, another managed short-distance movement, and others served as meeting points that appeared harmless to outsiders. This structure allowed the network to operate quietly because family gatherings never raised suspicion, and shared vehicles moved without attracting attention. Federal agents understood this advantage and planned the raids to break that trust in a single moment. By striking several houses at once, they cut the communication lines that family networks rely on to survive. Inside one residence, agents secured a living room where framed family photos still hung on the walls, creating a sharp contrast with the reality unfolding on the floor. In another house, A garage door was forced open to reveal vehicles positioned for quick departures, their interiors clean and ready for use. Bedrooms that looked ordinary moments earlier became holding areas as agents separated occupants and ensured no one could destroy evidence. The atmosphere was tense but controlled, shaped by the knowledge that every person in custody represented a link in a much larger system. There were no dramatic speeches and no unnecessary movement, only a steady process designed to dismantle the network piece by piece. The focus on a family-based structure changed how agents moved and what they expected to find. Trust within these groups replaces the need for external communication, making surveillance difficult and warning signs rare. Relatives share keys, schedules, and routines, which allows drugs and money to move without the patterns seen in street-level operations. This model depends on silence and loyalty, and both were broken during the raid. Federal teams treated each home as part of a single operational map rather than separate locations, understanding that removing one piece without the others would leave the system intact. Outside, the streets remained quiet as neighbors began to notice flashing lights reflected on windows and the low sound of doors closing. People stepped onto porches, confused by the sudden presence of federal vehicles where nothing had happened for years. To them, these were familiar families who attended local events and lived everyday lives, not the center of a drug operation. That confusion was not accidental, but the result of a network designed to blend into everyday routines. The arrests challenged the assumption that danger always announces itself with noise or visible chaos. By the time the sun began to rise, several homes had been cleared, suspects secured, and evidence protected from removal. The operation demonstrated how federal agencies approach threats that hide behind family ties rather than on street corners. This was not a sweep driven by chance, but a precise action against a structure built on trust and shared silence. If you are following this case, comment with your thoughts on fentanyl, family-based networks, and hidden crime inside American neighborhoods, because what was taken from these houses would soon reveal a scale far larger than the quiet street suggested. That discovery marks the next stage of the story, as the focus shifts from the arrests themselves to what agents found inside the bags, rooms, and locked spaces they had just secured. The case began without noise, without raised voices, and without any indication that a larger conflict was about to erupt, as a single patrol car followed an ordinary vehicle on a quiet Minneapolis street. The road was narrow, the air cold, and the traffic light was green, making the moment feel routine and forgettable. A minor technical issue with the vehicle provided the legal reason to stop, nothing more, and the driver complied without any resistance. At that instant, nothing suggested danger, and that illusion of everyday life was precisely what the network relied on to survive. The officer approached with practiced calm, noting details that often go unnoticed during uneventful shifts. The driver answered questions politely, hands visible, movements slow, and documents ready. The vehicle interior looked clean and organized, suggesting intention rather than carelessness. Yet subtle signs did not align. The pause before answers lasted slightly too long, the trunk sat lower than expected, and the air inside carried a sharp chemical edge that did not belong. These details did not prove guilt, but they justified a closer look. When permission was given to open the trunk, the moment shifted from routine to exposure. Inside, tightly wrapped bundles rested in precise alignment, their uniform shape revealing planning and repetition. A digital scale lay beside them, clean and functional, indicating preparation rather than chance. Stacks of cash followed, bound and counted, far exceeding what an ordinary driver would carry. The officer did not shout or panic, but the discovery put an end to any doubt. This was no personal stash or short-term transaction. A field test confirmed fentanyl, a substance known for its lethality, and its value within organized distribution chains. The quantity suggested supply rather than consumption, and the packaging showed familiarity with handling and movement. This was not a spontaneous decision made by an individual, but rather part of a system designed to move products efficiently. At that moment, the traffic stop ceased to be a local matter. The information carried weight beyond the street where it occurred. Reports moved upward through official channels with urgency but without spectacle. Local authorities understood the significance and transferred the case to federal partners who had seen similar patterns elsewhere. The decision reflected experience, not fear. One vehicle had revealed a structure that could not be addressed in isolation. Federal analysts received the details and compared them with existing data, finding similarities that suggested a connection rather than a coincidence. A joint task force formed quietly, bringing together agents from the FBI, DEA, and Homeland Security. Their focus was not on immediate arrests, but on understanding the system that led to those bundles being placed in a trunk. Surveillance replaced confrontation, and patience replaced speed. Investigators began mapping names, vehicles, and routines, building a picture piece by piece. This phase demanded restraint, because acting too soon would alert the network and scatter its components. What emerged was a family-based operation built on trust and silence. Roles were divided carefully, with each member handling a specific function. One individual coordinated movement and timing, ensuring that deliveries followed predictable routes and avoided attention. Another managed logistics, selecting vehicles, arranging storage, and maintaining schedules that blended into everyday life. Financial records were handled by a trusted relative who documented transactions in handwritten ledgers using codes that were meaningless to outsiders. Short route drivers formed the visible layer of the operation, although they rarely appeared suspicious. They moved small loads across familiar neighborhoods at hours when streets were empty and observers were few. Their vehicles looked like those used for work or family errands, and their behavior drew no attention. Meetings often took place in ordinary locations, such as parking lots behind small shops, quiet side streets, or garages attached to homes. These settings offered anonymity through familiarity. Money flowed through the same logic of concealment. Transactions were broken into smaller amounts, kept below reporting thresholds, and distributed across multiple accounts. These accounts belonged to relatives, elders, or distant connections, creating layers that obscured responsibility. Cover stories explained the movement, presenting transfers as business revenue, community support, or family assistance. On paper, nothing appeared extreme enough to trigger alarms, and that restraint allowed the system to continue. The ledgers revealed consistency rather than chaos. Entries followed a pattern, recording dates, amounts, and brief notes that tracked movement over time. The handwriting demonstrated discipline and repetition, indicating an operation refined through experience. This was not a temporary arrangement or a reckless gamble. It was a long-running structure designed to survive by remaining unremarkable. As investigators compared findings, signs of broader connections emerged. Packaging methods, purity levels, and movement schedules aligned with known distribution practices beyond Minneapolis. Routes suggested coordination with supply lines that crossed state boundaries, linking the family-based operation to larger networks. These were not confrontations with cartel leadership, but rather functional partnerships that allowed products to move efficiently once they entered the region. The significance of the original traffic stop grew clearer with each discovery. The network depended on physical movement, a necessity that no amount of planning could eliminate. Vehicles must travel, packages must change hands, and cash must be counted. Each of these actions created moments of exposure where routine intersected with observation. In this case, a single stop revealed a system that had relied on remaining invisible. Investigators recognized that dismantling such a structure required understanding rather than force. Arresting one person without mapping the rest would only prompt adaptation. Instead, they traced connections, followed routines, and documented relationships. Family ties replaced formal hierarchy, making loyalty a stronger bond than fear. Breaking that bond required precision and timing, not haste. The driver at the center of the traffic stop was not viewed as an outlier, but as a component of a larger machine. His actions reflected training, expectation, and trust in the system that supported him. That perspective shifted the investigation away from individual guilt and towards structural collapse. Each new detail reinforced the same conclusion. This was a network designed to blend in with everyday life. As weeks passed, the task force refined its understanding of how the operation sustained itself. Movement schedules avoided patterns that could be easily tracked. Communication relied on in-person exchanges rather than electronic messages. Family gatherings doubled as operational meetings, masked by routine social interaction. These methods reduced risk and reinforced internal loyalty. The traffic stop that initiated the case uncovered more than just contraband. It exposed the fragile point where secrecy meets reality. Physical movement inherently creates risk, regardless of how carefully the planning is executed. That risk cannot be eliminated, only managed. On that night, management failed. The consequences extended far beyond one vehicle and one driver. By the time investigators completed their initial mapping, the network was no longer a theory. It was defined, documented, and vulnerable. The task force prepared for the next phase, aware that understanding the system was only the first step toward achieving its goals. What followed would shift attention from how the network operated to what its products caused once they reached the street, setting the stage for the consequences that would soon come into focus. The consequences of the operation did not remain confined to evidence rooms or case files, but spread outward into neighborhoods where the damage had already been done. As the agents reviewed what they had seized, a pattern began to emerge that pointed beyond logistics and planning and toward the human cost. Pills taken from houses and vehicles matched the appearance of tablets recovered at overdose scenes across Minneapolis. Their size, color, and markings were identical, creating a quiet but undeniable link between the arrests and the deaths that had been treated as isolated tragedies. This connection shifted the focus from movement to impact. Emergency calls had been rising in clusters that followed no clear public pattern, striking different parts of the city without warning. First responders had seen the same signs repeatedly: bodies collapsing quickly, breathing slowing, and recovery windows shrinking. Many victims believed they were taking mild medication, something familiar and trusted. Instead, they were exposed to fentanyl doses strong enough to overwhelm the body within minutes. The pills looked ordinary, and that deception had carried lethal weight. As investigators laid out seized tablets alongside medical reports, similarities became impossible to ignore. The fake pills shared the same press marks and the same uneven distribution of substance inside. This was not a coincidence produced by the street. It was the signature of a controlled supply. Each match strengthened the case that the network had not only moved drugs, but had directly fueled the overdose surge that strained hospitals and families alike. While the human cost became clearer, the investigation itself began to stretch outward. Financial records taken from the houses did not confine themselves to Minneapolis addresses. Ledgers contained names, dates, and amounts that aligned with transactions flagged in other states. Analysts compared entries line by line, finding patterns that repeated across different jurisdictions. The exact transfer amounts appeared repeatedly, small enough to avoid notice, but frequent enough to be significant. Phone numbers and contact lists added another layer of complexity. Calls connected Minneapolis numbers to contacts in cities hundreds of miles away. The timing of these communications followed delivery cycles rather than personal schedules. This rhythm suggested coordination, not coincidence. Each link raised the possibility that what had been uncovered was only one part of a larger cross-state structure. Investigators began mapping these connections visually, pinning locations and tracing routes that extended beyond the city. The map became crowded, with lines extending into neighboring states and terminating at points known for their distribution activity. This expansion did not happen suddenly, but through the steady accumulation of small confirmations. Every ledger entry that matched an external transaction pushed the investigation further from its origin. The idea of separate cells operating under a shared method gained traction as evidence stacked up. Different groups appeared to follow the same operational logic, relying on family ties, trusted couriers, and quiet meeting places. These cells did not communicate openly, but their similarities suggested a shared experience or guidance. Such a structure would allow the network to absorb losses without collapsing entirely. Federal agencies adjusted their posture as the picture widened. What had begun as a focused case now demanded broader coordination. Investigators requested records from out-of-state partners, comparing notes and timelines to establish a comprehensive understanding. Surveillance extended to new locations, storage facilities, and rental properties drew attention. The effort remained methodical, driven by verification rather than assumption. For Minneapolis, the shift carried weight. The city was no longer seen as an endpoint, but as a node in a larger system. The drugs that passed through its neighborhoods did not stop there, and the money did not stay local. This realization reframed the arrests, turning them into the opening move of a much larger response. Families affected by overdoses felt the impact long before the investigation reached this stage. Grief had already settled in homes where answers were scarce. The knowledge that the pills had a traceable source did not ease that pain, but it provided clarity. The damage had not been random. It had been delivered through a system that prioritized profit over life. As the investigation crossed state boundaries, coordination intensified. Information sharing became constant, with analysts comparing seized items, financial trails, and communication patterns. Each match reinforced the same conclusion. The network functioned beyond one city, adapting its methods while maintaining a recognizable core. The transition from a local case to a federal operation altered the scale of response. Resources expanded and authority widened. What had once been handled within a single jurisdiction now required a unified strategy. This escalation did not come from politics or publicity, but from necessity driven by evidence. Agents understood that expansion also meant resistance. As awareness spread, those connected to the network would adapt, move, or go silent. This dynamic demanded caution, because aggressive action without preparation could fracture the trail. Patience remained essential, even as urgency grew. The spread of the investigation mirrored the spread of the harm it addressed. Just as overdoses had appeared across neighborhoods, evidence appeared across states. Each step outward revealed another layer, another connection, another reminder that the original arrests had touched only the surface. By the time federal coordination was entirely underway, the case no longer belonged solely to Minneapolis. It represented a model of how hidden networks operate and how quickly their impact can cross boundaries. The focus now turned toward accountability on a broader scale, setting the stage for a response that matched the reach of the damage itself. This expansion marked a turning point, where a single city's crisis became part of a national enforcement effort. The following section will examine how that widened response reshaped priorities and expectations moving forward. What began as a routine traffic stop on a quiet street slowly unfolded into a picture far larger and more unsettling than anyone expected. A minor technical violation exposed fentanyl, cash, and tools of distribution, and from that single moment, investigators were led inward, not toward chaos, but toward order. The trail revealed a family-based system that operated with discipline, trust, and patience, moving drugs through neighborhoods that appeared calm and safe. What appeared to be everyday life was, in fact, the outer layer of a structure built to hide in plain sight. As the investigation progressed, the scope of the operation became apparent. Fentanyl moved alongside large sums of cash and carefully controlled weapons, supported by routines that blended into everyday schedules. This was not the work of impulsive dealers or short-term criminals, but a network designed to survive over time. Its reach extended beyond a single city, connecting locations across state lines through shared methods and repeated patterns. Each arrest and seizure confirmed that the system functioned as a coordinated whole rather than scattered parts. From this perspective, the danger was not limited to the substances themselves, but to the manner in which they were transported and protected. Family ties replaced hierarchy. Loyalty replaced fear, and silence replaced visibility. These qualities allowed the network to avoid attention while causing real harm. Overdoses, financial damage, and broken trust followed the same quiet paths as the drugs themselves. By the time the system was exposed, its impact had already reached far beyond the streets where it began. Looking ahead, this case raises a difficult possibility. If one family-based network could operate for years without detection, then others may exist in similar conditions, using the same methods and assumptions. Quiet neighborhoods, trusted faces, and familiar routines create opportunities for systems that rely on being overlooked. The lesson here is not limited to one city or one group. It points toward a broader challenge facing enforcement agencies as criminal structures adapt to blend into ordinary life. From the federal viewpoint, this reality demands earlier and stronger intervention. Waiting for visible chaos may no longer be an option when harm is delivered quietly and efficiently. Investigations will likely proceed more quickly, expand more widely, and rely more heavily on coordination across jurisdictions. The goal is not to disrupt communities, but to protect them before damage becomes irreversible. This approach reflects a shift from a reactive to a preventive approach, shaped by cases like this one. As this chapter closes, the story does not end with the arrests already made. It leaves behind a warning about what can grow when trust replaces scrutiny and familiarity dulls attention. If you want to follow how enforcement responds to these hidden threats, subscribe to Military Power for deeper coverage and continued analysis. And consider this question as you reflect on what you have read. Do you fear crime on the street, or the systems hidden inside the neighborhoods you trust every day?